Is Andrew Bednarski, and he is going to speak to us on ARCE Luxor APS, Archaeological Update 2014. And I hear you're going to sing and dance too, right?
That's right. I got a big finish with some fireworks. Thanks very much. My talk today brings us to Luxor, where ARCE has for the past 3 years undertaken a truly ambitious program of work. While John Sherman, my colleague, will talk more broadly about this program later this afternoon, I'm going to talk about the archaeological side of ARCE's work in Luxor. And more specifically, I'll talk today about ARCE's archaeological goals and accomplishments on Luxor's West Bank. There we go. I'm going to discuss the progress of the Gourna site improvement project and the excavations in and around the tomb of Jehudi, Theban tomb 110. Both of these projects are located here, on the opposite side of the road from the cultivation, nestled against the Theban hills. I'll start with the Gourna project, which is winding up its second and final season of work as I speak, which frankly makes me a little bit nervous because I should be in the field, but here I am speaking with you. I digress. This project is dedicated to improving the site of Sheikhat el Gourna and El Hoja. The area is also known as the Valley of the Nobles. It's home to an extensive ancient cemetery, and since the early 1800s, it was also home to hamlets where local people lived and worked. These hamlets were destroyed as part of a local government initiative between 2007 and 2010. I won't go into the history and structure of the Gourna site improvement project, as I talked about that at last year's ARCE meeting, and as this information can be found actually on the project web pages, which form part of ARCE's website. Suffice to say that the project's goals of improving the area and recording and mapping the modern and ancient remains of the former hamlets of Gourna came about out of two factors. One, a need to address the state of the site after the modern settlement's demolition. And if you need an example of what the site looked like immediately post-demolition, this photograph does that justice. But it also came about out of a need to address the desperate need for large-scale employment after the severe economic downturn following the 2011 Egyptian revolution. To achieve its goals, the project has used a workforce of about 600 men, coupled with a corps of Egyptian, era-trained archaeologists to remove by hand, not mechanically, but by hand, the loose demolition debris and to record what's found. Now, addressing the state of the site after its demolition was important for several reasons. To begin with, this UNESCO World Heritage Site was not only left in a state of visual disarray, as you saw in the previous photos, the collapsed or sometimes partially collapsed housing remains generally made the site unsafe for visitation. And I'll use this image as an example to emphasize exactly what I mean. Not only is this area in the photo close to one of the main pathways used by tourists to navigate the site, it also contains a number of tombs that are accessible for study. So, for example, there's a Bulgarian mission that's working in this tomb. Jackie Williamson is actually interested in doing some field work in this tomb. There's a third tomb that's further off screen there to my right. And then that arrow actually points to a large hole that was in the ground. That portion of ground actually forms another chamber that connects to another tomb, and there was a hole in its ceiling that we had to actually plug and then secure in case anybody walked over it and fell down into the hole. Another reason to address the site when we did was due to a repeatedly expressed desire on the part of the Egyptian authorities to complete the demolition process that was stopped in 2010 by removing all of the remains of the former structures, including the floors, the foundations, and everything else that you see in this photo. As a result of all of this, ARCE believed that it could use the opportunity presented by funds provided through USAID to put Egyptians back to work, to improve the site for visitation, and to record the remains of the hamlets before further demolition occurred. Now, visually, this work has made an enormous difference to the site, as you can see from this before photo, and there we go from this after photo. You can see that it's a lot more navigable and comprehensible both for visitors and scholars. In addition, the archaeological and ethnographic results have been absolutely astounding. Historically, there's been very little scholastic interest in the modern hamlets, despite the fact that they constitute the latest stratigraphic layer of the site. There's also been very little interest in how the buildings of the hamlets related both to the ancient tombs and the landscape, despite the fact that this leads us into the territory of adaptive reuse for the whole area. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to report that at this stage, we have over 3,000 archaeological features recorded. These include the remaining walls, floors, staircases, ovens, and even pigeonholes of the former buildings. And while doing this recording, we've communicated continually with our workforce, many of whom either lived in Gourna or in fact had relatives or knew people that had lived in Gourna. And they've been able to provide essential information, such as the names of the people who lived in the buildings, the sizes of the families, the occupants' professions, and basically all that information that as an archaeologist you wish you actually had access to when you first approach a site that most of the time has been abandoned for quite a period of time. We also have over 800 objects recorded, both ancient and modern. We've taken great pains to record the modern material with the same exactitude as the few ancient pieces that we found. And we've done this very consciously because, for example, this tourist antiquity that you see there was something that would have actually been worked and created in the hamlets. It would have been sold to tourists as they were passing through the hamlets, and then the money gained from it, of course, would have been spent back in the hamlets again. So this little item here gives us great insight into at least one portion of the local economy that once thrived there. This item here was also found in the housing debris. It's a lot less benign than the tourist antiquity found to its left. It's in fact a magical spell that's sole purpose is to render a man impotent. So unfortunately it doesn't give us insight into the economy of the hamlets, but it does give us insight into one facet of the social interactions within the hamlets. Our efforts to amass a corpus of material culture with which to discuss life in Gourna led us to keep all of the modern pottery alongside the ancient pottery that was removed during the clearance effort. And the image that you see here is, of course, just a tiny fraction of the multitude of pottery that we were able to collect. And this meant that our ceramicist, one of whom is deciding it would make a great photo if he was taking a slug out of the material he's supposed to be working on, have had access to an enormous amount of material from the entire length and breadth of a modern rural Upper Egyptian settlement. And the area in which we're dealing is about 1 square kilometer, so it's truly large. We're going to use these data to establish typologies, discuss matrices, and record the local and non-local names of all of the vessels that are found. And I believe this aspect of the project will provide the largest, most in-depth ceramics data set for a rural modern Upper Egyptian settlement to date. At this point, the ceramicists have drawn over 200 vessels, representing standard forms found throughout the site. And even their preliminary findings are interesting. For example, they've determined that the modern material is likely no older than 50 years, despite the fact that many of the forms that they're seeing are based on forms that go back 100 years. So where is the other 150 odd years of material that we should be finding? They've also identified the lack of any sort of modern finewares amongst the debris, which is surprising. Many of the Gournawi that lived in the area were not poor, so where were the finewares that they would have been eating on? And if there weren't any finewares, why was this not one form of ceramics that would have existed? And they've established a gap in the ceramics record. As for example, we have no daily life material from roughly between the 9th to the 15th centuries AD. And this last observation calls into question the repeated notion of continuous habitation at the site. To complement the other forms of recording, our surveyors have laid over 80 survey points across the 1 square kilometers. They've also worked hard with foreign missions to incorporate existing survey points, and the result will shortly be a list of survey data that can be downloaded from the ARCE website and used by any of the missions that want to work there. Today, all missions at Gourna use local systems, but with our coordinates, any mission can now tie their site into ARCE's UTM-based system. Along with this survey data, and in tandem with recording buildings' features, we've mapped about 100 individual structures in Gourna. This mapping, coupled with a topographic survey that will be done once the clearance work has been completed, will give us the latest accurate map of Gourna, and it'll include the former building's footprints as they relate both to the ancient tombs and the terrain. Our fieldwork will be done at the end of April, and we're planning on having all of our data processed and archived by the end of July. And the result is going to be a truly daunting data set on the latest stratigraphic layer of an incredibly important archaeological site and on a displaced people. These data, however, are clearly worth analyzing and publishing over the coming years, and that's my sales pitch for Gary to keep me employed for a little while longer. On the border of Sheikh Abdul Gourna and El Hoja lies the tomb of Jehudi, Theban tomb 110. Jehudi was an 18th dynasty cupbearer to both Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, and his tomb is interesting because of its representations of both rulers within it. Now, this is a view from atop the tomb, with ones back to the Theban hills looking towards the cultivation. For the past 2 years, ARCE has undertaken a project to conserve, clean, and open this T-shaped tomb for visitation. In order to open the tomb, however, it was necessary to excavate its never-before-explored forecourt, as during the modern era, it's only been accessible through a break in another tomb, TT42. So if you just look up here, the blue outline is TT110, the standard T-shaped tomb. The forecourt is, of course, here, located here. It very likely shared a portion of a forecourt with this other tomb that ran parallel to it. And then to enter TT110 in the modern era, you had to go in here through 42 and then a break in the wall to get to TT110. As I explained in the last ARCE bulletin, last season we excavated the tomb's pillared hall, and here we have one of our archaeologists desperately trying to find a little bit of room to lay a baseline on the ceiling to excavate it. And this work resulted in hundreds of finds, including mummy parts and even portions of TT110's inscribed walls. In addition, the first third of the forecourt excavation work was done through an archaeological field school for MSA inspectors. Over last summer, and with the start of this season, we explored and partially excavated TT110's burial shaft and lower chambers, which are not immediately straightforward despite this diagram in front of you. The burial shaft for TT110 is located here. It comes down from the pillared hall. You can see that there's a room that it connects to at the top there, but more importantly, there's a smaller room here and a larger room here that we believe were part of the original TT110 construction. You then have another shaft from TT42 from outside TT42 that comes down, connects to the TT110 lower chambers, but then itself is a series of chambers that connect there. We also continued the forecourt excavation this season, and while the excavation began as a 10 meter by 10 meter square, the sides had to be expanded to avoid possible wall collapse as the work descended, and an access ramp had to be dug to facilitate both the work and tourist visitation. So here we have the square and mid-excavation. You can see these little shelves that were created as the bulks had to be cut back a little bit, and this is the ramp to try and help the workmen and visitation. The first 4 meters of material that was removed proved to contain dump from the local settlement, but also from clearance of the tombs in the area. And as a result, despite being a jumbled mess, this work revealed about 1,000 objects for study, including human remains, coffin fragments, inscribed material, and funerary equipment. But as we descended lower, the story got even better. We found what appears to have been the remains of an ancient retaining wall immediately above the tomb's facade. And you can see this line of white here, that's the top of the limestone facade. And then you can see bricks here and here that would have at one time formed part of this retaining wall that would have been capped by these limestone blocks at the very top. We also, of course, came down and found the entrance to the tomb, the lintel of which was inscribed with the name and one of the epithets of Thutmose III. And we found that the facade to the south of the tomb's door was also inscribed. So here's our brand new steel door that was installed just about a week ago. And the area here is actually inscribed. It's really in poor condition. The stone is really not a very good limestone. It's very friable. The inscription is a bit hacked up, but from what I can tell thus far, we have a portion of an offering formula that's there. Also located in the facade to the tomb, we came across a little niche containing what we think is possibly a Stelophorus statue of Jehudi himself. You have to use your imagination a little bit, but imagine a man kneeling down with his arms up in the air like this. And on the statue, we were actually able to see traces of red paint that still remained. So possibly it was unfinished, or possibly the statue was actually finished using plaster instead. And perhaps more intriguingly, we found evidence of multiple phases of use and reuse within the excavated portion of the forecourt. And these included 6 different walls, some of which appear to be the ancient walls that formed part of the original forecourt and that were reworked in a later period. I am very, very excited to have identified what appears to be the remains of original constructions outside of a Theban tomb. I mean, how many people get to excavate an unexcavated forecourt in Gourna number 1, and how many people, while doing that, actually come across some of the original constructions that would have been located in front of that tomb altogether? So the walls are a little bit difficult. This is a photo in mid-excavation, but we have a wall here, and then we have a step and another wall behind these mud bricks. We have actually a wall that the workmen are standing on with another one in the bulk, and then we have two that are located here that we can't really see from the perspective of the camera. This is another view of it, again, with this wall and step and other wall, but in this shot you can actually see we've uncovered the original stairs leading down into the forecourt altogether. Now, as I mentioned, part of the excavation work involved creating a ramp for visitors to use to more easily access the area. As this ramp was being expanded to try and assist visitation in the work, a little surprise turned up a few weeks ago. So here we have the forecourt and the excavation, and we have the mighty Theban hills in the background, and then we have this little surprise that happened to come out of nowhere. It's an intact burial, and that threw us all into a bit of a tizzy, because of course we hadn't anticipated finding anything of the sort. You have two coffins, you have a series of pots off to the left here, which contain embalming material, and then a basket and a chest that had been placed above the jars. A preliminary analysis of this material suggests that the coffins are most likely New Kingdom in date, but reworked and buried in the late period. And this analysis is based on the shape and reworking of the coffins and the dating of the pottery. As the excavations in the area continued, 7 similar further jars were found, but of course we were running out of time, so we had to stop digging in that area altogether. And despite the close of our work now at TT110, it's my sincere hope that ARCE is able to organize a further season to continue its efforts there. In particular, the work in the burial shaft and chambers needs to be completed, the objects need to be analyzed, and the forecourt fully excavated, not only to reveal the remaining architecture that I've just talked about, but to properly explore the burials that are very likely sitting atop it. Working for ARCE in Gourna over the past 3 years has been an absolute privilege. I'd like to thank everyone involved who's made this work possible, and in particular, I'd like to thank you all for listening today.